Welcome, welcome. How's everybody doing? Hope you're doing very good. Not doing too bad. It's still hot as hell here. We're going to talk about that up at the top. But folks, welcome to this week's Griscom stream. We're going to get into some things. Always happy to make these more interactive. So get some questions going in the chat. Feeling a little open right now. So happy to talk about a few different subjects. Don't forget, if you haven't already considered becoming a member, you can sign up at patreon.com/leftreckoning. There you get the post game. We had a really eventful one with Ben Burgess last week. Talked about a lot of stuff, some fun stuff. Talked about Tim Pool and his nonsense. Ben's new article up in Jackman Magazine on Marx's seemingly endless amount of critics who have dealt very little with the actual text of Marx, and we talked a little bit about political education and some of the damage that even people who might consider themselves to be on the left and socialist and Marxist sort of do to each other and to themselves by not ever really engaging with a lot of the history and thought behind these movements, and end up inheriting and importing a lot of baggage that they've picked up throughout their lives. And why, that's a bad thing for a movement that wants to fundamentally change the way that we work and live. But yeah, I'll jump in and take some questions in a second. But before I jump to the questions, so feel free to start loading those up so I can get to them. It's always better to front load those so I'm able to get down. Able to get to them early, because sometimes a lot come in towards the end. I'm not able to get to them all. But before we get there, we titled this one Water Criminals. And it's because right now in Austin and in many other places, we're dealing with water crisis. Here it's been over 100 degrees for upwards of 40 days. We're seeing massive amounts of drought. And the city of Austin has now requested people to lower their water usage so that the reservoirs can fill themselves back up. This is not unique to Texas. This has been happening all across the country as the planet gets hotter, as our water systems are more and more under threat. But I wanted to talk about not just climate change, but some of the really, really nasty actors that make these crises worse. And I just want to hone in on one story from around our area here. This is from KUT. Utility company Aqua Texas ignored pumping limits in 2022, threatening Jacob's Well. And if people aren't familiar, Jacob's Well is a really beautiful natural swimming hole. Is also connected to one of the major aquifers in the region. And right now, this is what it's looking like. This usually is shooting up out of the out of the ground. Very nice, beautiful water. But more importantly, from just like the kind of cultural and leisure aspect of Jacob's Well, it shows how depleted our water is in the area. And while we are all making sacrifices, and it's a good thing to do, right, collectively, when something like this happens. There are people who aren't making sacrifices, primarily private corporations that have direct control over our water systems. So Aqua Texas, a water utility company with customers in Hays County, was fined nearly $500,000 for pumping almost twice the amount of water it was allowed last year out of the Trinity Aquifer, which feeds Jacob's Well. Quote, it's by far the largest fine that's been assessed to anybody at this groundwater district, said Charlie Flatton, general manager of the Hays Trinity Groundwater Conservation District, which issued the fine last spring. The Trinity Aquifer supplies water to the Wimberley and Dripping Springs areas. Flatton said overpumping is partially responsible for Jacob's Well running dry this year. And yeah, so look, what happens here? A company that is basically making money off of our natural resources is continuing to pump far beyond what they have been allotted, far beyond what people who actually study and care for the management of these water systems are saying they should be doing. And what do they get? They get a slap on the wrist. Yeah, $500,000 sounds like a lot of money, but for these companies, it's not much. Yes, it's a historic fine. But when you're talking about a company that is directly threatening the life of people in the area, and then also the environment in the area, it's ludicrous. And it just goes to show the kind of irrationality of the system that we live in. because this is something that you can't fix overnight, right? That $500,000 is not going to refill the aquifer. It's not going to fix the water crisis. And why is this happening in the first place? Well, it's because this company has an interest in continuing to pump water, even if it might hurt the environment or hurt the local area, because it's better for their shareholders. And going back to this piece for just a second, um, I wanted to note this line right here. Um, This is a pattern. This is a business model, Flatten said. They are in the business not to conserve water for the future, but to sell water to their customers because they've got to fulfill their payouts to their shareholders. Flatten said Aqua Texas is the only permittee in the district that faces pressure from shareholders about its water management practices. He said investor owned utilities don't have all the tools available to ones that are publicly owned. They can't pass ordinances or other legal requirements that would help achieve conservation. And this gets down to fundamental issues that we're having with utilities in general, from water to electricity. What happens when you have a private corporation in charge of these systems, right? These private corporations, the fact that they provide water to people is an afterthought, right? And then the responsibility that these companies have to the environment, to the community, to make sure that they don't forever decimate the areas where they're operating, it's limited, right? And if the threat is just that is going to be a negative effect on their balance sheet, right? Well, they can plan for something like that, right? They can pay the fine. We're seeing this. I talked about it last week with Elon Musk and his operations in the area, which have been extremely damaging to the environment, extremely damaging to the aquifers, continuing to pump more and more water, overreaching on what they initially said that they would be utilizing in the area. And this just goes down to one of the fundamental basic realities of capitalism and why the system doesn't work for everyday people. Because if you had a rational system, right, you could maybe say things like, if there's needs of people to have water, right? There's needs of homes to have water. There's needs for agriculture for water, right? But in a moment like this, you absolutely have to be thinking about conservation. You absolutely need to be thinking about the water levels in these aquifers. Central Texas is really unique in the state of Texas. Human population has been here for a very long time because we have such a bounty of natural aquifers that provide the area with not just plentiful water, but oftentimes very cold water, right? Because it comes from underground, which is something that's very nice when it's 105 degrees for days and days on end. But as private industry has grown in the area, and as in this example with Hayes County, when you have a private corporation, basically, with some oversight from government, with some oversight from conservation organizations, but their only tool that these organizations have to sort of curtail waste and dangerous practices from these companies are fines, right? You basically have an institution that is fundamentally only interested in one thing, and that thing is profit, and that thing is making sure that their shareholders are happy. In a moment like this, that's so devastating and dangerous, it is ridiculous to be sitting here and saying, oh man, we wish that the private corporation that has access to the water that belongs to all of us isn't going to be greedy or overstep their boundaries. Of course they are. Right. Of course they are, because that is what their MO is, right? That is their reason for being, is to make profit off of these systems. And it runs up against this, the fundamental basic reality of the limitations that we're now facing as the population booms in the area, as industry booms in the area, and it's completely anarchic. Right. So you have this threat, and then, you'll see so many of these new developments that are being built up around here have little to no plans for water conservation, right? Plans for the kind of landscaping that they're putting in. Literally, you're seeing people building up the more private golf course neighborhoods in a part of the country now that is regularly experiencing droughts, right? That's anarchic. Right, that's ridiculous, and it's extremely dangerous when you look at the reality of the changing climate in the region. No rational system should function this way, and these are those kind of moments when you come across them in your region or whatever. This is the kind of moment where it's really important to actually be able to make this point that, look, does it make sense that a private corporation now has access and control to our water, oftentimes to our detriment, right? Um, and is acting in the way that they're acting. No, these things should 100% be under public control. There's no reason to have a private corporation literally taking the water from the earth, threatening the lives of all the people who live in these areas, threatening the environment, and threatening the long-term sustainability of these aquifers. I mean, if these aquifers were ever to run dry, I mean, it would be absolutely devastating for the nearly 1 million people who live in and around the Austin kind of extended metro area. And we're playing games. You have this, and then you have Elon Musk over there in Bastrop, where he's just playing with his goddamn toys, right? His stupid ass boring company, which has provided zero social good, right? At least this company, right, ostensibly like puts water in pipes for people to use and drink and survive on. Musk is just like playing with his toys out in Bastrop, drilling into the ground just to have fun, right, and test out his new ideas. They're drilling in areas that oftentimes are like 15 to 20 feet above where the Edwards Aquifer is. What does that mean? Well, these drills and these boring machines that he's created are covered in all these kind of chemicals that are not sustainable for water, right? For humans, for potable water for people to be able to drink, for plants and things like that to grow. And he's just getting away with it, right? You read these stories. We talked about this last week. You read these stories about like, oh, government officials, county officials saying, oh, yeah, I'm very mad at this guy because he's doing all these things that he didn't say he was going to do up front. Well, why are we letting him do that? That is ridiculous to sit around here and allow somebody like that, particularly somebody like Musk, who's doing nothing of social value, particularly with the Boring Company, right? Which is just a grift and a fantasy and ludicrous from the get-go. For people who don't know this, he's going to build tunnels under cities so that we can have a highway underground, and that's going to somehow fix traffic. There's an older technology that works much better for them. That's called trains, and it's worked for a very long damn time. So like the idea, these are just those moments when like capitalism really rubs up against reality, right? Do we want to maintain a private profit system for these guys? People like Musk and people like this company in Hays County to decimate our water supply, to decimate our environment so that they can make a bunch of money? Or do we want to have systems that are run rationally with the public good and the public interest at heart so that you don't have things like a company over pumping these wells, getting them so low that then once the summer hits and the drought starts, you have something like Jacob's Well not being able to flow on any level. It's ridiculous. These are kind of basic things that I think are really important agitationally for the left to be able to point out. But folks, let's get to some questions. Happy to hear from all of you. I see there's a few in there, so I'm going to scroll up to the top and go down, and let's get going. So I'm going to go up to the top. So if you have a question or a comment or anything like that, get it in there. Super chats are very much appreciated, and appreciate everyone who sent those in already. If you aren't doing a super chat, maybe tag like at Left Reckoning at the top, because sometimes it's hard for me to catch what are questions, and I might skip y'all if I don't see something that indicates it's a question. Empty says, as water is life, water crimes should be up there with attempted mass murder, or at least millions counts of reckless endangerment. Yeah, it's a huge threat to a lot of people, and it's ridiculous to sit around here and act like, oh, this is just business as usual. Left Merch says, in regards to barbecue socialism, what is the ideal barbecue to center it upon, in your opinion? Well, it would certainly be Texas barbecue, but I mean, like, the idea of barbecue socialism is just that, people deserve not just like the absence of exploitation and oppression. People deserve community. People deserve to have nice things. People deserve to have, as Lula said, a nice picanha steak and a nice cold glass of beer. So, any kind of good, anything that gets people to be able to hang around outside for a while is good in my book. So, pork ribs are good. Man, I'll tell you, the easiest thing to barbecue, if you ever want to have a little barbecue for your friends and you don't feel like smoking something for 8, 10, 12 hours, dude, chicken thighs are cheap. Just put a little oil or fat on them, good seasoning. You can smoke those in like 45 minutes to an hour, and they'll be one of the best things you've ever had. 250, 275 Fahrenheit. Strom's good to hear from you, friend, and thanks for the chat. Strom says you might want to read the Posted Courier's feature on the water criminals of McBee, South Carolina. Well, send that my way. I'll look it up. The Posted Courier is a really great newspaper, by the way, for people who haven't, want good info on South Carolina. Lorida says, I got two questions. One, has Universal gotten to you yet? I heard some new music on the channel. Two, where do I go / do more other than just reading old contemporary texts and joining organizations? Well, I'll tell you one thing on the first question. For people who don't know this, Universal Music Company has come after Left Reckoning, and we're sort of in a bit of a squabble with them because that music that plays at the beginning of the show that was recorded by our good friend Christoph Brun for the sole purpose of Left Reckoning, a song that we own, like the company Left Reckoning owns, was created for us, all that. Universal Music has started to claim it as their own song, which is ridiculous. And I wish I could play y'all the song that they're saying that we took from them. It is just not even close to what the Left Reckoning theme song is. So we're dealing with that, and I think probably a few other people are. And like for people, not to talk too much behind the scenes stuff, but for people who don't know, like YouTube has a really awful copyright system where basically any big corporation can just come at you and claim that they own your stuff. And once that happens, they demonetize all of the videos that you have that use that music, and it goes into an escrow account. And you're supposed to, and the idea is that you give that to the other company. Usually you just sort of pull the video or whatever if you play like a clip from the news and the news comes at you. But in this case, I mean, this is literally a song that's in every one of our videos and a song that we own. So we're going through that. I think we have like 2 more weeks for Universal Music to send us a response letter. We're still waiting for that. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, it sucks. And the second question is, where do I go to do more other than just reading old and contemporary texts and joining orgs? Well, I'm not sure what you mean. I think just being able to read widely is good. Catalyst magazine, which is like the kind of theory journal of Jacobin that Vivek Chibber and a few other people put together, is a really great resource if you want to get a kind of wide range of theory and responses to the conversations that are happening on right now. Lorida says, is school for this kind of politics? Or is it? I mean, if you have the opportunity and the desire to be able to, achieve more education, I think it's definitely a good thing. No, I don't think that you have to go to school to learn this kind of politics. I mean, one thing that's really helpful is you can use there's tremendous amounts of resources right now on YouTube of scholars giving talks. I think reading through Leo Panich's work and watching Leo Panich's lectures might be a fun thing, an interesting starting point for you. And then you sort of say, okay, well, he's talking about this moment or this thinker or this idea. I don't know much about it, and maybe that helps you sort of select what it is that you want to dive more into. So I think that's a really good way to sort of, I think the best thing you can do if you really want to do kind of self-education is to find something that interests you, try to engage with it, and then when you find things that you don't know about that are sort of being referenced or talked about, then jump into those, and that will sort of branch out into a lifelong project, honestly. Narrative Dude says, your thoughts on Soren Mao's mute compulsion? Just picked it up. I haven't read through it yet. I think Cale Brooks, who we had on a couple weeks ago to talk about degrowth, is working on a review potentially for it. I don't know what the status of that is yet. And thanks so much, Narrative Dude, for the super chat. I really appreciate that, brother. They say shareholder driven capitalism seems to be the root of so much of the ills in our society. How do we encourage a move away from it, or what legislative or authors, philosophers offer alternatives? I think understanding that history is very worthwhile. Grace Blakely wrote a really great book. Is it called Vulture Capitalism? This is a couple years back. And she talks about, like, yeah, vulture capitalism. by Simon and Schuster. Really good book, and it talks about like the rise of the corporation. And Grace is somebody who has a educational background in finance and in economics, right? She's like absolutely a leftist and a socialist, but she's someone who has that kind of practical education in how these things developed. And I think looking at her work, and it's extremely accessible, is a great place to start. Another really great book on the subject is Leo Panich and Sam Ginden's The Making of Global Capitalism, which looks at the entire period of financialization and the kind of building blocks of the system that we're living under. Towards the second bit, how do we encourage a move away from it? I think, well, agitationally, politically, like the move is to point out its irrationality, right? I think that that's first and foremost, to be able to build a political project that can deal with it. I think that when it comes down to it, the two models that are out there for dealing with the financialization of the corporation in both the United States and globally, there's the two models, right? Which is state nationalization, state ownership nationalization. And I think there's a lot of things that you should be utilizing that for. I mean, I think all of the major fossil fuel corporations should be nationalized yesterday, so that we can use those resources and the resources that they control, and be able to make decisions about how we are going to be utilizing them to be able to transition those to green or renewable energy, and also to be able to make the decision, hey, we're not going to drill here, all that kind of stuff. The other model is to sort of take over these corporations from the bottom up, which I think is more of the radical socialist tact, but that's going to need a political movement. So, like, I'm not one of these people who thinks that a certain kind of like speculation tax or something like that, or a tax on paying money back to your shareholders or things like that will solve the problem. I think if you could do it in a kind of intermediary step, it would certainly help out, at least push back against some of these more irrational and dangerous decisions that are happening. But that can't be the horizon, or else we'll just sort of, those things will fall away over time, which has happened every single time that reformist movements have sort of tried to put a cap on capitalism. Joe Snuffy says, why don't homeowners devote their time to oppose stuff like water extraction instead of affordable housing when the former harms property values more? I mean, I think that's a good point. I think, there's going to be a difficulty about organizing homeowners in this country for a little while. But I do agree. I think that, it's pretty amazing that there's a hyperfixation on affordable housing and not on the literal exploitation and devastation of the land around you. And in Hayes County, the area that we're talking about, I mean, Dripping Springs in particular has gone through just such a huge boom as Austin has grown. And what I always say to people, even like more centrist or right leaning people that I know, because Austin, like many cities, has like there's people out there who can get really worked up about affordable housing and things like that. And look, I'm like I'm from here, and I get sad when things change. Like I think it's worthwhile and it's reasonable to sort of admit that there's it can be upsetting when certain neighborhoods sort of disappear, when certain vibes and in certain areas change dramatically. But what I tell to people is that if we don't start fixing the problem in Austin, it also means that all of these other places like Dripping Springs, like Wimberley, like Lockhart, really beautiful and fun places to be. Well, those places get overtaken too, because if there can't be building of affordable housing in the city itself, well, what happens? It just has to sprawl out. And Austin is on a trajectory to become a city, more like a Houston, in the sense of just being a massive, massive sprawl that sort of overtakes all of these beautiful small towns and areas in the hill country, which I think would be a real devastating thing. So I think there's like the thing that there's just so much propaganda out there, and there's also the fact that a lot of people tend to become more conservative when they control more assets, because the conservative pitch to them is that they're going to up those asset prices for you, be they homes, or other kind of assets. So that's why I think the left, it's a worthwhile strategy to sort of be able to get in there on some level, not to bank on it and expect that you're going to, win those people overnight. But yeah, I think that, there is a kind of self-interested argument you can make there. Do I not know what this is? How's it going, Dave? It's good to hear from you again, friend. David Hellman says, I always forgot his name is Watermelon Musk. Did I know this? I don't know. Thanks, Daniel. Yeah, I did. I just cut it off a couple hours ago. It's too goddamn hot to have long hair here, I gotta say. Oh shoot. I mean, I have to apologize. I did not know. Daniel says, what are your thoughts on the SAG after a interim agreement? Is it tepid, or am I too ideological? I haven't been able to go through it. I'm really sorry. I wish I did. That's my bad. Very angry response here from Jimmy says, why did Texans forget to add a little bit of mustard to barbecue sauce? Well, I'll tell you one thing. Right, mustard being mustard based sauce, of being a very like South Carolina style of barbecue. You would think that there might be a little bit more of that here in Texas, because the reason there's so much mustard barbecue is because you had in South Carolina is because you had a big German population come there. Well, same thing here in Texas, particularly Central Texas, which has the best barbecue. But I'm sorry. Like, this is where Texas is just so much better than the rest of the South, in my opinion, when it comes to barbecue, is when you hear Southerners talk about the different barbecue styles. What do they say? They talk about, oh, they use this kind of sauce here, they use that kind of sauce there, they use this kind of sauce over there. In Texas, for a long ass time, man, you could not get barbecue sauce at all at most places, particularly like the old school places. And if you did get something, it would be this kind of like tomato sauce. It wasn't even really a barbecue sauce. It was just like a little bit of drippings, a little bit of tomato. Um, and it was something you just sort of, it was like really watery, and it was something you might dip something into. And it's because in Texas, they have a belief that if your barbecue is good, it should speak for itself. And that's why Texas style is defined by, obviously the meats that we use, but also that it's salt and pepper. Um, though most places use a little bit of garlic powder in there too, but they don't admit it. Because I don't know. And I like that. There's a little craftsmanship, a little challenge. It's just like, if you've ever been, not to be a fancy guy over here, but if you've ever been to Spain, um, the Basques, the Basque people too are really, really limited on the seasonings that they use, because if you're putting a lot of herbs and seasoning on your food, it means it might be bad. Tetu says, I studied political science in the U.S. and the field is pretty interesting as a communist. I'm sure it was when I was an undergrad as well. Um, it always felt a little bit separate from what I was interested in. But I'm glad I got to learn how a lot of those folks think about politics. Appreciate the chat here, friend, from Spin Me a Sailcloth. They said Robert Owen coins the phrase, quote, 8 hour 8 hours labor, 8 hours recreation, 8 hours rest. Homespun movement in 1767, the Quakers Swadeshi movement, Gandhi, the Luddites, the Silk Road, cotton. I'm sure you get the idea. Good slogans, good movements. Come on, Grace Blakely. Bad Lefty says Grace was often on Navarre Media in the UK. She's extremely smart, but very easy to understand or relatable, or I don't know. She's great. No, she's a great communicator. We've had her on. We had her on Left Reckoning to talk about Stolen, which was the book I was initially thinking of. But this new book, Vulture Capitalism, is supposed to be really good as well. Our good friend in Australia, Dylan, says, if the iron law of oligarchy is true, let us think of reformism as the task of Sisyphus, with all of us pushing the anti-corruption boulder up the hill. For people who don't know, the iron law of oligarchy is this kind of theory about what happens to social democratic and reformist labor parties, and you see how it's sort of borne out. But remember too, and like, because this might come up later, remember too that a very important part about the kind of pitfalls of the very important part of the criticism of social democracy and the pitfalls of reformism is not that you should, like, the idea is not that you should not push for reforms. We did a really long, and people should watch it. It was one of the pieces that Matt and I did that I really enjoyed doing, and I think was really comprehensive. Reread Rosa Luxemburg's fundamental text, Reform or Revolution. And it's one of those texts, as we said in the post game with Ben last week, just like Lenin's ultra leftism and infantile disorder, with Rosa Luxemburg, a lot of people just read the title and then imagine the argument, right? And then they'll say, well, you got to read Rosa, right? But it's like, well, have you read Rosa? Literally the first sentence of Reform or Revolution is Rosa saying, oh yeah, like, we got to be getting things for the working class as soon as we can. But we can't lull ourselves into sleep into thinking that reformism is going to be able to maintain itself. What Rosa's argument is in the kind of metaphor, and I believe she uses that, if not exact one, but something similar to it, is that the problem with reformism is not that it can't achieve a lot for working people, and not that it can't be beneficial, like winning things like an 8-hour workday, winning things like higher rates of unionization, winning things against the capitalist class like higher wages. She's not saying don't do it, but she's saying that whenever the class forces reset themselves, right? So like a powerful reformist movement might be able to get a lot done for like a generation. But the point is that eventually those movements might corrode, that balance of power might shift, and then it comes back down upon you like that boulder in the myth of Sisyphus. Right. So the point is that you never lock in those achievements as long as you maintain capitalist power. And that is the real crisis of reformism, right? Which is something that is missed a lot by a lot of people on the left, who misunderstand like the radical critiques of reformism as, oh, don't ever do things, or don't ever try to get people elected to office, don't ever fight in the political arena, for anything other than like the final goal, right? No, there's a lot of benefit in winning these kind of things for people, but the idea is that you can never be able to feel comfortable, and you have to always be pushing forward, because the capitalist class will wait for 15 years for those things to reset so that they can roll them back. The United States, like, I don't think you could argue that the New Deal was social democracy, but it's probably as close as we've gotten in the US. And like, look what happened with the New Deal, right? New Deal imperfect, right? I'm working on a big piece about what happened with rural tenant farmers in the South during the Agricultural Adjustment Act, where you had the vast majority of Southern labor, particularly in the Western South, right? Louisiana, Arkansas, Texas, Oklahoma, working as tenant farmers. And when the federal government said, hey, don't grow things and the government will pay you not to grow things. Well, what happened to the people who were actually working the fields? Well, they weren't getting any of that money. So basically they saw their livelihoods disappear. But like, there's a lot of achievements in the New Deal that are very laudable. But look what happens in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, all the way to today. Those get pulled back, right? So the threat of reformism is not what people often make it out to be, that, oh, people are going to get too comfortable and happy. It's that political movements eventually will run out of steam. And when the capitalist class has the ability, particularly to run unopposed or against a weakened opponent, like they did in the American context, they will just steamroll all those reforms and eradicate them. So, there's a lot of pitfalls in reformism. The iron law of oligarchy talks about sort of socialist and working class politicians getting enmeshed and embedded within the state, losing their connection to the base, starting to see their role as maintaining this kind of system. And it's not like a moral critique of like, oh, these people lost the fight and they lost the heart. It's actually a structural one. So, I think getting those things right is really important. And I think something that some loud voices on the left sort of struggle to do, which is pretty frustrating. Adam S says, "Do homeowners even have mineral rights in America?" Well, actually, it depends state by state. So some states have, particularly states that came from a more French or Spanish tradition. You actually don't always own what's underneath your home. Um, Sometimes you can own a home, but some other kind of company or bank might own the mineral rights underneath it. It's a huge problem out in West Texas. Where people might have a big ranch, but some other company owns what's under the ranch, and they have to the ranchers have to give them access to the oil, and then it becomes an even bigger problem. Let alone from the fact that those people weren't able to get money from the operations on their land, because an even bigger problem when those wells stop running. Um, Either through neglect or lack of interest, and then you just have this big ass well on your land that gushes up oil and can pollute your water. There's a huge crisis of abandoned wells in Texas and New Mexico and Louisiana right now. Spin Me a Sailcloth says, I think going back to what they're talking about the Quakers and the Luddites, is target the textile industry. Synthetic fabric production is one of the top 5 polluters and uses petroleum at multiple stages. I wonder where this was. The best barbecue I had was in the Houston airport. Now, I would already have suspicions if you said the best barbecue you had was in Houston, but I'm even more suspicious now. I wonder, do they have like a Terry Black's or something in Houston now? Terry Black's is like the industrial barbecue um, monolith now in Texas. The Vibe Train, bringing some vibes over here, says, and thanks for the super chat. Says, did you listen to that Oliver Anthony song, "Capturing Country Music Right Now"? He had me in the first half, but brought up the welfare queen myth. Yeah, I mean, I listened to the song. Um, I came across it organically, just in the sense I didn't get it from the kind of Twitter freak out about it from like some of the country music blogs that I follow. I I'm just gonna be the song, like the politics of it with him talking about 5'3" fat people is bizarre. I don't I'm just gonna be completely honest, friends. I do not understand how this has been such a lightning rod for people. There's a country song that has conservative lyrics that you don't like. I, I I say this as like a country fan, as somebody who regularly is trying to, revitalize, um, the more radical tradition and history within country music, and pushes back against this kind of narrative that it's just like captured by the right today and has always been captured by the right, because that's not true. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. Some guy wrote a bad country song. I just like, for the life of me, I do not understand. Unless you're just doing it as like a bit of criticism, like Hamilton Nolan wrote an essay that I shared on it that I thought was good, which is about about the song, but it was really just sort of talking about that kind of frustration that you see from people, where people sort of criticize um, wage labor and things like that, but then it takes this conservative bend where it's like, okay, well, the enemy is not the capitalist class and all those people profiting off of you. It's somehow people on social programs, right? I thought that was a good essay from Hamilton, but I'm sorry, I hope I'm not disappointing people too much. Um, I do not understand why this has created such controversy, that there's a bad country song out there. I don't get it. I know that, like, oh, well, it looks like it was like AstroTurf, but yeah, so is like any kind of piece of music. There's always like a marketing strategy behind it, and like even if it is like coming directly from the right, I don't get What is because if people remember, like 3 weeks back, there was another moron out there who was getting mad because they had moved from New York State to Tennessee, and they were getting pissed at people like Tyler Childers and Sturgill Simpson, and Jason Isbell, and a lot of them, all these people who are making really great music right now, saying, "Oh, there's this conspiracy to turn country music into a left wing propaganda arm." It's like, no, this is what country music is. It's a whole spectrum of people. Um, and the last thing I'll say about the Oliver Anthony song is that, like, he's doing like a kind of, it's very much like derivative of like Tyler Childers, who, if you haven't listened to, is really great. And it's just like, it's a bad knockoff of Childers. And if anything, the popularity, that it might have, the organic stuff, we're not talking about the weird Matt Walshes and stuff like that. People are pushing it. For people who are like, "Oh, I like this song," it's because a lot of people don't ever get to hear that kind of revival of more traditional sounding country music. So, if this was the first song you've heard in a long time, and the only time you've heard country music is like the bro country that's on the radio, it might really resonate with you. More so than somebody who like listens to a lot of Sturgill Simpson and Tyler Childers or bands like Croy and the Boys. But I don't know. I mean, like, if somebody has like something else that they want to say on it, I'd be happy to hear from y'all. But like, for me, I don't get the controversy, other than the fact that it's just like the lyrics in the song are bad, right? And I just don't understand how it's gone beyond just saying, "Oh, I don't like this piece of music. I think it's a bad piece of music." I think the message of attacking other working class people, instead of the people who are profiting off of the misery of millions. I get that critique. I make that critique, but you know, we got to be able to move on. Strom ads. Reforms are good if they are one and understood as steps taken toward the socialist revolution. I agree completely. But I mean, I would say, like, for a socialist movement, but I mean also, like, if we could get Medicare for all, which is a reform, and even if it wasn't delivered through like our movement, which I think it probably is the only way it would happen, it was still beneficial, right? Being able to understand what these things are, I think, is important. Dude, it's time. Schultze says, "Howdy, I salute you all. Hook 'em horns. We're ready for Texas this year. I think Texas is going to have a good season." We have a. I'm sorry. I'm probably like 10 minutes behind y'all. So if I haven't got to your question, I'm working my way down. Austin M says, "Just recently discovered the channel. Well, thanks for coming by and hanging out with us. I've really been enjoying it. I was wondering what your take is on voting for candidates like Joe Biden, who I would deem unacceptable because of lesser evilism." Yeah, I mean, like, we talk about this a lot on this program. I'm going to give you, if it's okay, like, the short take. I find the amount of energy and space that, which way you vote in a presidential election, when you don't have, when the left, and particularly like the socialist and working class movement, is a non-factor or non-player, to be just a tremendous waste of time. Why do I say that? Because when you're talking about, "Oh, well, we got to line up behind Joe Biden to stop Trump, et cetera, et cetera," or "We got to line up behind Obama to stop Mitt Romney." Um, One, like, not even getting into the strategy of lesser evilism. I mean, what are you talking about? Right? We don't have like a movement. So, like, if we had a kind of socialist organization or socialist movement that, like, let's be conservative, like, even just represented like 4 or 5% of the electorate, right? And then it actually might be able to swing in a close election one way or the other, then maybe there's a strategic conversation to have, right? I do think that political independence, for these movements, is important, right? Now, what individual people do within these movements, unless it's something that the organization or the group has decided we're going to do collectively, um, if it's just people making decisions, it's like, I really can't get worked up one way or the other about what you do. Because we just don't have the structure to actually be able to make ourselves a force on the national scene. So spending a lot of time getting worked up about that one way or the other, I just find to be really exhausting and not focusing on what matters. I will just say, on the left, lesser evilism, lesser evil, like, argument. It's like, you could say the same thing, in the election with Woodrow Wilson, right? There's always a threat. And I think that the most important thing for socialists to be doing is figuring out a way to build up our power. And I'll tell you that I don't think that like the socialist movement should be like the vanguards of like pushing people to sort of line up for people like Joe Biden. On the other side, and this is why nobody gets happy with what I have to say on this, I also don't think that spending a lot of time, pushing for fringe and marginal candidates for president builds working class power either. And I say this as somebody who has voted green in multiple presidential elections, but I didn't do it because I thought this is going to open up the door for working class movement. I did it because personally I didn't want to support or put my vote towards somebody who is bad and a warmonger. But like, I don't do it with like this illusion that this is going to open up any kind of politics, or even frankly, that like in some fluke that like the Green Party would be able to deliver us into a new kind of political paradigm. I don't think that's the case, unfortunately. And the reason that this conversation is exhausting for me is that like people I find like want to get a kind of political shortcut to power, and all of these kind of debates and frustrations that we have about these things are symptoms of our disorganization and our political weakness, and spending a lot of time getting worked up about what we do in a moment of weakness instead of thinking about ways to build up that kind of power, I find to be a really big waste of time on the left. David, what are your thoughts on Lexington, North Carolina style barbecue? I think the best barbecue in the country is in the state of Texas. I think easily the second best state is North Carolina. Um, South Carolina has some really great barbecue, but I think North Carolina brings it to the next level. So I'm a fan. I think North Carolina style barbecue is really good. Um, what are the worst barbecues in the South? Should I get people pissed off? I mean, Louisiana is the easy one, but let's not. Louisiana, Florida, they don't count, right? Louisiana already has such good food; they don't need barbecue, right? Um, Tennessee might be third, right? I'm not including Kansas City. I think Kansas City barbecue can be really nice, but it's not like it's like an amalgamation of a bunch of different things. Um, Maybe I need to go to Kansas City again and try it with some folks. But top three, I think, would be Texas, North Carolina, um, Tennessee, right? Alabama is famous for white sauce, and I love the respect for chicken that they have there. But I also think that when you're talking too much, I mean, and I say this as somebody who makes a lot of smoked chicken. I think smoked chicken is really good, but I think when you're leaning on that, not as impressive. So tell that to the Valley Labor Report guys; they'll get pissed. All right, let's see if we've got any more questions here before we run. Here's Schultz, basically saying what I'm saying about the Oliver Anthony song. I thought the guy was okay and an all right singer, but yeah, I didn't like it either. And so fucking what? Here's an idea: leave your politics out of it. Be a poetic. Okay, that's the deal. Also, like put your politics in it. I don't care. Uh, I mean, look, like who's somebody who's like super right wing? Clint Eastwood. I think some of Clint Eastwood's movies are some of the best. Um, he's one of the best directors. He has declined dramatically. I think in the 2000s, I think The Mule, one of his more recent movies, was just awful. It wasn't even just because of politics. I just thought it sucked. But I love like Outlaw Josie Wales is like a fairly conservative film, right? Has some kind of like populist stuff, but I think it generally is pretty conservative. But it's a great movie. And maybe this is just because like a lot of the media and stuff that I enjoy is like has can have a lot of like right wing domination that I just sort of can compartmentalize things. But for me, I was just less interested in people who I know like don't listen to country music at all, just going on and on and on about Anthony. don't care. I've heard of this. I haven't been to Oklahoma Joe's. Christo says best barbecue I've ever had is Oklahoma Joe's in Kansas City. It's in a gas station. I've heard legends. I definitely need to get there. I mean, barbecue is good, man. I mean, it's good. I've had great barbecue in Portland, Oregon. Now, of course, it's not Oregon style barbecue; it's Texas style, but really good stuff at Partners. And I think there's another guy's name that I'm forgetting that I liked even more, but I can't remember off the top of my head. But usually, I don't eat barbecue when I'm out of the South. Not because I don't think that it can't ever be good, but why risk being disappointed? The worst barbecue I've ever had in my life that was hyped up like crazy was that place. It's called Hometown Barbecue in Brooklyn, in Red Hook, and I've never been more devastated by that barbecue. It wasn't bad per se in the sense of like it being tough and nasty or whatever, but it has ambitions to be considered a great barbecue place. And I found it to be ridiculously bad, particularly like the lack of smoke flavor in the brisket. I could not believe it, knowing how nice of brisket that they were getting sourced to them, how expensive it was. One of the most devastating barbecue experiences I've ever had. Is Steve Earle country? Yes. Steve Earle's great too. This is true too. Hip hop is killing country and western, though. I have to say, this is just me like exposing myself as the redneck that I am. I used to like Cowboy Troy, who used to perform with Big and Rich, another group of people who, particularly John Rich, who's a real moron. That's bad stuff. Cowboy Troy, who's the other guy? I'm trying to remember him. I can't remember. There was like one of the really early when country rap first started taking off in the 2000s. There was a guy I really liked, and I look back at that now, and it's really embarrassing. Also, fudge rounds was a hilarious thing to throw in there. Also, I'm sorry not to talk about signs, but 5'3" was a very bizarre and kind of particular height to get worked up about. I don't agree with the attacking people for being overweight or whatever. But there's a kind of common derogatory just rudeness that people do. Talking about people who are really short, I found to be a weird addition to that, but probably needed to fill out some words in his song. I mean, like he ran out of ideas at that point, basically. Ooh, this is a good question, and I know we're talking a little barbecue and football here, but whatever, it's my show. Tommy has a great question. This is the kind of thing I want to talk about more. Talking about the University of Texas Longhorns, Quinn Ewers or Arch Manning. So for people who don't know, we have one of the Mannings at UT now. Was scouted as just a phenom talent, as was Ewers. And there's not controversy, but there's a question who's going to be the starter this year. I mean, from everything that I've heard, Manning's looking really good. I think that Manning is probably going to get to do a few drives, particularly in the opening game. I think Ewers has the starting job. Ewers, like, I think last year, if people remember when we played Alabama, he was on fire in that first half, and then he got hurt. And when he came back, he never really had it, and he was out of sync for the rest of the season. And I can't remember what he had a pretty bad arm injury that I think he had to play through the entire season. So it definitely hurt him a lot. I'm really looking. I'm very much I'm not a big Sark fan, the UT coach, but I think it'd be devastating for the program to let him go. So I don't push for that, but I think you got to give Ewers the starting role, and if we start getting disappointing performances like you saw towards the end of last season, it's a really nice thing to have a phenom backup quarterback, and I think Save Arch Manning for the SEC, and let's give a hometown boy our last swan song in the Big 12. But I mean, it's a nice ass problem to have, is to have two really, really competent quarterbacks. I mean, I'm forgetting off the top of my head the QB3, but he's really good too, from what I've seen. All right, might take a couple more. Well, Strom, if you get any barbecue in Alabama, let us know what you think. Isn't Schmegley says Alabama? Dude, we're coming for Bama today. Alabama barbecue ribs mostly taste like ham, says Schmegley. Thank you, Pythagoras, for the super chat and for supporting a very important theorem. Left is best. Thank you. Dylan says about my complaints about hometown barbecue. I probably shouldn't come at those guys too hard, but particularly the lack of smoke flavor. I couldn't believe it. I mean, because they claimed to have smoked it for 18 hours, and they must have figured out a new technique to smoke something for almost a day and get almost no flavor on something. No, and Strom, this is a true thing. Strom says the Outlaw Josie Wales was written by one of the top racist shock jocks in the South, Asa Ace Carter, and he probably wrote Wallace's 1963 gubernatorial inauguration speech. Look him up. I think I thought that connection was sort of proven because I believe when he wrote, or at least when the Outlaw Josie Wales was sort of shopped around, he had gone under a pen name and was pretending to be Native American. So there's all sorts of wild theories about it, right? Was he doing it because he thought his name was too toxic, or did he have like a kind of change of heart? Because like the Outlaw Josie Wales, I don't know if I would consider to be a conservative film necessarily. I don't think that it's radical per se, but it's certainly, it's probably the only movie that sort of goes into, like, apart from like ones that are explicitly about this, that sort of like at least the beginning of it is during the Civil War from the Southern perspective, that doesn't really go into a lot of like lost cause mythology, right? Like it's very much a personal story. There's not a lot of commentary on the war there. And the Confederates turn out to be bad guys just as much as the Union, right? So it's a little bit of a middle of the road take. That's why I say it's not a very, very radical film. But anyways, there's like theories that basically this guy who probably wrote George Wallace's speeches might have sort of had a change of heart, but who knows? I don't know. I don't know enough about the rest of their life and other works that they did to be able to comment on it. But it's a very fascinating little backstory to that movie. I agree. Short Kings stand up. I mean, I don't understand this slander over here from Anthony. That's probably the most offensive part of the song. Christo says, Grandpa used to say country music was going Hollywood when George Jones had violins instead of fiddles. I mean, that's the thing that's amazing. I mean, it's like so many things. Like Austin, the joke about Austin is, in every generation, there's always been like Austin is dead, right? Country music is the same thing. I don't think Hank done it this way, right? The Waylon Jennings song. All right. I'll take a couple more and then I'm going to run, y'all, unless there's no more. Jay says, Dave, do you want to start a band? Also, any advice on cultivating reading habits you and Michael are really good at? I used to be solid, but I've fallen off recently, not feeling too smart. Dude, I'm just like, you just dive back in. I go through, I mean, like, the problem for me is that, like, I have to do so much reading for work now, right? Because, like, a lot of these podcast guests, like, they'll send us their book, and you got to read their book, which I'm happy to do. It's like a perk of the job. It also means it's hard for me to read other things like fiction, in particular, or just like random histories that I'm interested in. But, I mean, I think the best thing is, particularly now, is just like you just got to find some time, um, where where you can sort of be distraction free. Like find a good place that you like to hang out and leave your phone in the other room, or you can go on the Matleck, the Matleck system, which I wish I could do because it's Matt's the most prolific out of Matt reads way more than I do, and more than Michael, but Matt does it because he listens to audiobooks and he like plays video games, which is a great multitasking technique, but I can't do it. I mean, a great movie. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is easily one of the best westerns of all time. True to the genre. This is a great suggestion as well. Jay from New Jersey says, I recommend a deep dive into on the Bayonne refinery strike of 1915 against Tidewater Petroleum. I learned about it in a labor history class in college. Love to do that. I'll take a note. That sounds really interesting. I don't know it. So, all right, folks. I think I'm going to run. We'll be back this Sunday with a patron only episode. You get access at patreon.com/left reckoning. We're going to have Bronco March Teach, I believe, on the show next Tuesday. So keep your eye out for that. Hopefully we're going to get Corey from Corey and the Boys, which is one of my favorite country bands, on the program soon. I've been talking with him to see when we can sort of line up our schedule. Some big things I'm also working on the side of Left Reckoning, that particularly our Texas audience and people in the surrounding areas, New Mexico, Louisiana, Oklahoma, maybe sometime later more places will be covered, but working on a pretty cool project. So keep your eye out for that. And, keep your eye out for that. And when I'm able to announce more, be ready to support and spread the word. But folks, I'm going to run. Hope you all have a good weekend. Stay cool, stay safe, and look out for each other. Talk to you later. Bye.